You're gambling with World War III.
Это нарушает нашу безопасность, расширение НАТО.
As a military strategic planner, a former planner, you don't want politicians telegraphing what your next moves are going to be.
The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it, too.
A peacekeeping force does not exist with a ceasefire.
Russia has played down President Donald Trump's orders to move nuclear submarines closer to Russia, saying Moscow did not want to be involved in nuclear rhetoric. President Trump ordered 2 submarines to be positioned in the appropriate regions last week in response to what he called highly provocative comments by former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev. So what could this threat by the US president mean in practice? Here to help us understand this better is our resident analyst, Mikey, former assault helicopter pilot and senior officer in the British military. Mikey, great to have you on to talk about this. Let's start with President Trump's response then, the words that he used there. 2 submarines to be positioned in the appropriate regions.
Yeah, the important bit of that very vague sort of sentence, Steve, is we don't know if Trump was referring to nuclear-powered submarines or a nuclear ballistic missile capable submarine, which is also nuclear-powered. So I wanted to start off by just looking at submarine capability, which can be split down into basically 2 components. There are hunter-killer submarines and there are bomber submarines. What does that mean? Let's go slide. This is a US Navy hunter-killer sub. This is the Los Angeles class. This is actually in Pearl Harbor. Now, there are 2 other classes in the same class that the US used. There's a Seawolf class and the Jimmy Carter class. Now, this is known as an SSN, which is a submarine nuclear-powered attack. Okay, that's what the SSN bit means. So not nuclear. They do not carry nuclear weapons, but they are powered by a nuclear reactor, as I said. Now, in the case of the Los Angeles class, it has what's called a vertical launch system. If we go slide, I'll show you what that is. That's the front nose of an SSN, and they're the compartments in which TLAM, Tomahawk Land Attack Missiles, they're cruise missiles, they're carried in that, and they will be launched by these SSNs subsurface on their targets. Now, for example, these cruise missiles, the TLAMs, they were used by the US to soften Iran's nuclear sites, along with the B-2s. This class, though, isn't just about TLAMs. It's also used to target other submarines, for example, or above surface shipping, as well as surveillance and reconnaissance. So that's the first bit.
Yeah, so even if they're not nuclear powered, or if they are nuclear powered but not nuclear armed, they're still dangerous. But you mentioned the bomber class as well. Is that the class of submarine that carries the US and UK's nuclear deterrent?
Yeah, I think this is the most important bit to focus on. It is, and it's via, the nuclear bit is via a ballistic missile delivery system. Let's go slide. I'll show you what one of them looks like. This is the US Ohio class submarine, known as an SSBN. That stands for Submersible Ship Ballistic Missile Nuclear, the nuclear bit being the important bit. It's the largest ever built for the US Navy. It's the 3rd largest ever built in the world. And this particular submarine can carry up to 24 Trident II nuclear capable ballistic missiles. The UK actually call this capability CASD, C-A-S-D, and that stands for Continuous At-Sea Deterrent. Now, the next bit's really important here, Steve. In terms of the US nuclear deterrent, these submarines form part of what is called the US nuclear triad. This triad, as well as the US bomber submarines, includes, let's go slide, 2 key strategic bombers. This one is the B-2 Spirit, and if you remember the shape of these are the ones that conducted the attacks on the Iranian nuclear site. So they can travel a long way. They actually travel from Missouri all the way over the target of Iran and back in one trip. The next strategic bomber that's used in the deterrent, let's go slide please. This is the B-52H Stratofortress. Now, this aircraft can carry up to 20 air-launched, nuclear-capable cruise missiles. So it's quite old, but it's incredibly effective. And the 3rd component of the nuclear triad is the land-based ballistic nuclear missiles. Now, coming back to Trump's comments, what's important here is when he's talking about repositioning subs, the submarine part of the deterrent is the least vulnerable to a first strike. Why? Because they are below the surface, they are very stealthy, and therefore they're really hard to detect. So the main mission of these US bomber submarines, SSBNs, nuclear-capable submarines, is to maintain what's called a credible second strike capability. What does that mean? Basically, it means even if the US were to suffer a devastating first strike from an adversary, the strategy is there would be enough submarines to survive that would be able to launch a retaliatory strike, hence the deterrent bit, right? So in summary, the submarines would most likely be used in a response capacity rather than a preemptive strike capacity.
So the backup or the counterpunch to any strike that might come first. Well, we can dive a little deeper into this, Mikey, and broaden our discussion and include a retired Commodore in the Royal Navy and former Submarine Commanding Officer, Bob Fancy. Bob, great to get you on to talk about this today. Tell us what type of submarine you commanded and give us a sense of the kinds of operations you were in.
Yeah, good evening. Thanks for inviting me on. I think, if I may, just to begin my answer to your question, and I will make it fairly quick. I think it's really important to note in the context of this discussion that when submarines are classified as operational and ready for operations, they deploy from their home ports ready for war. So they're stored properly and all their routines are adjusted so they can transition into combat at a second's notice. And then there will be very little difference to the crew because they are operating as if they're at war anyway. And I think that's really, really important in the context of this discussion. I was very privileged. I commanded an SSN or a hunter-killer, HMS Trafalgar, with an exceptional crew. And I can give you an example of the kind of operations by referring to that preparedness for war. So we found ourselves on the eastern seaboard of the United States. And we were bringing into service the latest variant of the TLAM cruise missile. And we'd been deployed for about 3 months, and it was the final certification we needed to be ready for war. After 3 months, we returned home. And as we returned home, there were the dreadful September the 11th attacks. And rather than the submarine staying in harbour, people going on leave, seeing their family and their friends, etc., we stored for war within days. We sailed. And we made fast passage across Mediterranean into the Indian Ocean. En route, we did highly complex technical integrations with American 5th and 6th fleets, which had never been done before. And once we'd got into the Indian Ocean, within days, we were on the gun line, fully integrated with the US Navy and conducting strike operations. After our part in those strike operations was complete, we then redeployed to do surveillance operations in support of the strike efforts. And when that was complete, we did intelligence gathering operations as well in and around both the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Aden. We eventually returned home some 6 months later. So in point of fact, the crew and the submarine had been deployed for 10 months, largely out of contact with friends and families, etc. And hopefully I've painted a picture there, engaged in a wide variety of operations.
Bob, it's great to see you on. Yeah, it's great to see you on. It's a while since we worked together, but and I know this is the first time you've done this, so I really appreciate coming on just to give your insights. I just want to go back to what Trump said about repositioning nuclear submarines. What type of submarine? And I know we don't know, but given your experience, what type of submarine do you think Trump is talking about when he says repositioning?
Well, you're right. We don't know, but let's have a quick look at that. You very well described the bombers and the hunter-killers. Now, the bombers operate in a vast, highly secret patrol area. So when he says he's going to reposition 2 submarines, I don't think he can possibly be talking about his bombers because they will be at sea doing their at-sea deterrence, hiding from enemy. And their areas are absolutely huge. And you have no reason to move particularly close to your targets because the range of the missile systems these days are extremely long. So I don't think he's talking about bombers. He's probably upping the rhetoric and implying that he would be moving SSNs into an area where they might be able to gather intelligence or surveil what's going on. They are always going to be in an appropriate area. If they're not, we'd have lots of questions to ask. I think this isn't signalling a change, particularly in military activity. I think it's upping political rhetoric because when people start talking about submarines, they become anxious and worried because submarines are extraordinarily capable warfighting units capable of terrible levels of destruction. And so people do pay attention to it.
But when it comes to the Russian submarine force, is that a match for what the US have in terms of capability at the moment?
Probably the most interesting question we could ask at this stage is that one. And the reason for that is this. I started my career in the Cold War, and in the Cold War, we had significant advantage over our Soviet foes. When the war came down and we decided the Cold War was over, nobody gave that message to Russia. And Russia has continued to proliferate its technical capabilities and the number of vessels in its fleet. And so it is much more closely matched today than it was, say, 20 years ago, because basically we've dropped our guards somewhat in the West. And so America can field around 70 submarines, Russia can field around 60 submarines. There's not much difference in numbers. And these days, there's not much difference in capability. My assessment is that we still have the advantage, but we have absolutely no room for complacency whatsoever.
Bob, I know you've spoken to, I want to now switch fire to the Ukrainian intelligence hack on the Russian Bore class, which is its newest nuclear submarine. I know you've spoken to a retired Russian interpreter who's actually looked at those documents. To what extent have the Ukrainian intelligence authorities gained information on what this Russian Bore class submarine can do? Is it significant or not?
I don't think it's that significant. I think there's two elements to this. The data that's come out and has been published isn't particularly interesting. I think it's the lowest end of classification. It's a typical sort of documentation you would see surrounding a boat that's coming out of build and going into sea trials, training, pre-operational type stuff when they're getting their crew together, getting trained and looking at all the engineering issues they may or may not have. It's of interest, but it's not significant. Far more significant is the success of the cyber attack for the Ukrainians. This is massively embarrassing for the Russians. Their latest and greatest SSBN, and there's been a data leak on it. It's seriously embarrassing, and I'm sure heads will roll. But in terms of the technical information being released, I'm not sure it's that interesting, but we don't know if there's other stuff that's been shared with intelligence agencies.
Bob, it's been great to get your insight. Before we let you go, just want to touch on something you mentioned. You were talking about the capabilities of the US and the capabilities of Russia when it comes to submarines. So how do you see the UK's position when it comes to this in support of the increase in tensions we're seeing in the submarine environment?
Yeah, so I think the relationship between the Royal Navy and the American Navy is extraordinarily strong, especially in the submarine services. And it's at the very heart of that special relationship, along with our intelligence agencies. The technical capability and the proficiency of the people that crew Royal Navy submarines is exceptional. It's second to none in the world, I have no doubt. But the reality is, in terms of number of units we can field, we are pitifully small. We have a total of 9 submarines. 4 of those are bombers. That number of 4 allows us to put 1 to sea for the continuous at-sea deterrent. We have 5 SSNs. It will increase to 7, but at the moment it's 5. Of those 5 SSNs, there will be some in maintenance, there'll be some in training. Probably 2 or 3 maximum will be able to be deployed on operations. So in terms of skill sets, etc., we're up there. In terms of numbers we can field into combat, we've got a serious problem.